The Dakota Territory, 1876. Land scorched by sun and silence. And somewhere in the ashes, a woman the world had already given up on was still breathing. They said no one survived the Prairie Fire. 40 wagons gone. Only charred wheels and broken dreams left behind. But they were wrong. Nora Skye was not supposed to make it. Once a merchant's daughter from back east, her face had already been marked by one fire. Society never forgave that kind of scar. So she went west, where people didn't ask questions as long as you could work and didn't complain. She thought she was done being tested, until the wind changed, until dry grass turned to kindling, until fire came roaring across the plains faster than any wagon could run. They never saw her fall. They never looked back. And as far as the fort was concerned, Nora Skye died that day. But 3 days later, a half Lakota scout named Calder Thorne found her body in a dry creek bed. She was burned, broken, and barely conscious. And she opened her eyes. Smoke moves faster than fear, at least out on the prairie. It rolls low, snakes through the grass, and steals your breath before your mind understands why. Nora Skye noticed it before anyone else. A faint scent in the wind, bitter, dry. Her boots pressed into hardened dirt as she stopped, shading her eyes against the pale horizon. Something was wrong. Too still, too quiet. The sky looked bruised. Behind her, the wagons groaned and creaked forward, stretching across the plains in a long, sunburnt line. The Henderson Wagon Company, 15 wagons strong, was pushing west toward the promise of Montana, a chance to begin again. Nora didn't speak up. She'd learned not to. Quiet women weren't questioned much on the frontier, especially ones like her, traveling alone, no husband, no kin, carrying a borrowed name and a past that no longer fit. She walked beside the Wilson family's wagon. Frank and Sarah Wilson had 3 children and another on the way. They'd welcomed Nora into their space not with warmth exactly, but with practicality. She helped with the little ones, helped cook, helped stay out of the way. Sarah always said, "You don't talk much, Miss Skye, but you work like someone with something to prove." Nora had smiled. She did. That morning the sun burned high, and the wheels cut deeper into dry soil. Children laughed somewhere behind her. One of the oxen let out a heavy groan. Then, silence again, like the land itself was holding its breath. That's when the smoke changed, turned black at the edges, and that's when the shouting started. "Fire!" Chaos erupted. Men screamed for horses. Women clutched children. Drivers pulled at reins so fast the canvas wagons jerked like toys. Frank Wilson had ridden ahead earlier with scouts, leaving Sarah to manage alone. She turned to Nora, panic wide in her eyes. "The baby," she started. "I've got him," Nora said, her voice steady. Always was. She swept up the smallest child and pushed the others toward the forming circle of wagons. Mr. Henderson, the wagon master, was already barking orders. "Plow blades, fire brake, backfires now or we're done for." The wind shifted again, fierce and sudden. The fire wasn't creeping, it was racing. Nora didn't stop to think. She moved like her father had taught her, decisively. A Boston merchant turned hunter in his last years. He had taught her how to read weather, how to watch the sky, how to survive when things went wrong. She helped Sarah wet canvas and covered the children in damp cloth. She located their family's coin pouch and important papers, tied them into a bundle with care. The wagon jolted hard as drivers repositioned for defense, and Nora grabbed onto the frame for balance. Then she heard it, a deep crack, followed by a roar. Fire had found the edge of the camp. The Wilsons' wagon was on the perimeter. One flame carried by the wind touched canvas, and everything changed. The explosion of heat threw Nora backward. She landed hard, her ankle twisting beneath her, on a slope she hadn't seen behind the wagon. Pain lanced up her leg, but she gritted her teeth and crawled toward the wagon again. Too late. The flames were already licking at the wheels. Smoke burned her throat. The sound of screaming, of fire chewing through wood, drowned out everything else. She tried to yell. "Sarah!" No answer. Figures moved within the circle of wagons, pulling children, buckets, supplies, but no one saw her. No one looked back. Nora rolled down the slope as the wagon collapsed inward in flames. She hit the bottom of the ravine hard, dirt and rock catching her as the firestorm thundered above. A wall of heat surged through the dry grass, swallowing everything in its path. And then, nothing. Just silence. And ash. She woke with dust in her mouth. The sky above her was gray-brown and thick. Her leg ached like it was broken clean through. But she tested it slowly. Sprained, maybe. Bruised for sure. Her water was gone. Her canteen cracked from the fall. Her throat felt like she'd swallowed sand. But she was alive. She took stock the way her father had taught her. "What do you have?" The coin pouch, still tied at her hip. A wool shawl, half burned, but better than nothing. Her boots, her coat, her name. Nora Sky. She hadn't told anyone that it wasn't the name she'd been born with. Didn't matter now. That name had died with the fire, just like the rest of the train. They'd assumed she was dead too, and she might be soon enough. But she'd come west to survive something, and she hadn't walked through all this just to lay down now. For 2 days, Nora followed the dry creek bed, her limp worsening, her hope thinning. She rationed what little moisture she could gather from a muddy pool under a rock, used a stick as a cane, covered herself with the shawl when the sun beat down. The landscape was blackened and broken, burnt trees, dead birds, silence. Even the wind seemed afraid to move. On the third day, she collapsed near a bend in the creek, her breath coming shallow. Buzzing filled her ears. The sky spun. Then, hooves. At first, she thought it was memory, a dream. But the shadow that stepped between her and the sun was real. A man, tall, weathered, eyes sharp like flint. He crouched beside her and touched her wrist, felt her pulse, poured water into her mouth slowly, carefully. She tried to speak, but the words stuck. "You're safe," he said. "I've got you." His voice was low, gentle. Then she passed out. The man's name was Calder Thorne, a scout, half Lakota, half something else. He walked between two worlds and belonged to neither, but he knew what to do when someone was left behind. He wrapped her in a blanket, secured her belongings, and tied a travois to the back of his horse, carefully settling her inside it. He didn't ask where she'd come from, didn't ask who she was. Only one thing mattered: she was still breathing, and he wasn't about to leave her behind. When Nora opened her eyes, she didn't know where she was, but she knew she wasn't alone. Filtered sunlight flickered through a domed ceiling of poles and hide, and the air smelled of smoke, herbs, and something sharp. Maybe pine, maybe something older. A low fire crackled nearby. She tried to sit up and winced. Her ankle screamed, her throat burned, and her head felt full of cotton. A woman knelt beside her, dipping cloth strips into a clay bowl. Mid-50s maybe, her face lined with wind and wisdom, silver streaking the long black braid down her back. She moved with care, not softness, but certainty, like someone used to saving lives with limited time and no room for mistakes. When she noticed Nora stirring, she didn't smile, but she did speak. "You woke." Her voice was calm. Not kind exactly, but firm, like a hand on your back when you're about to fall. "Water?" Nora rasped. The woman helped her sip from a wooden cup. Cool, bitter liquid touched her tongue. Too bitter for water. Nora gagged slightly, then forced it down. "What is that?" "Medicine. Willow and coneflower. You're not dying, but you were close." The woman pressed a damp cloth to Nora's forehead, then examined her bandaged ankle. 3 days of fever. You don't remember much." "Bits," Nora whispered. "Fire. Wagon train. I fell. Calder brought you here. You'll live if you rest." Nora blinked. "Who are you?" "Call me Redfern. This is my lodge." Lodge, not house, not cabin. Nora realized she was lying on thick buffalo robes. Above her, the conical frame of a Lakota teepee. It wasn't just the setting, it was everything. The quiet around them, the scent of sage, the way Redfern carried herself, like no part of her bowed to anyone. A flicker of fear rose in Nora's chest. She was white. She wasn't sure how welcome she'd be here. Redfern seemed to see it in her eyes. "You're not a prisoner, you're a guest. But understand, this is Fox Hollow. It's not Fort Laramie. It's not the town you left behind. People here see things different. Nora nodded slowly. Thank you for helping me. Redfern didn't answer. She simply turned and ladled more of the bitter medicine into the cup. That evening, Calder returned. He ducked through the entrance just past dusk, tall and dust-covered, with a quiet presence that filled the lodge more than noise ever could. He carried a satchel of dried herbs and a skinned rabbit slung over his shoulder. "How is she?" he asked his mother. "Stubborn," Redfern said without looking up. "That's the only reason she's alive." Calder crouched beside Nora. "You remember me?" "I remember someone pulling me out of the fire," she said. "Figured that part was real." His eyes flicked to her bandaged leg. "You were lucky. Another half hour and you'd have been bones. I guess I owe you my life." "You owe me nothing," he said, "except not to waste it." He stood, brushed the dust from his sleeves, and stepped back out into the night. Nora stared after him. "Is he always like that?" she asked. Redfern gave the faintest hint of a smile. Calder was born between things, between peoples, between wars. The world made him quiet, not soft. By the next morning, word had spread. A white woman had survived the fire. A white woman was sleeping in Redfern's lodge. Some in the camp stared. Others stayed away entirely. Children lingered near the edges, watching. Not cruel, just curious. Redfern ignored the noise. She kept Nora fed on stews and teas and gave her tasks, small at first. Hold this. Stir that. Pull these dried leaves apart. The days blurred into rhythm. Heat, rest, the throb of her ankle, the scent of cedar smoke. A girl named Lark, no older than 16, became Nora's daily shadow. She didn't speak much English, but she mimed instructions with ease. Together they prepared herbs, folded hides, braided rope. Lark never flinched at Nora's silence, never asked questions. And in that quiet, something began to settle. One afternoon, as Redfern rewrapped her ankle, she spoke without warning. "You don't talk about your past." Nora stiffened. "Not much to tell. You're not a settler, not a ranch wife. Hands too fine. But you move like someone who's had to leave a place behind." "I didn't leave," Nora said, her voice sharper than intended. "I was left." Redfern gave a nod of understanding. "That's worse." They said nothing else, but the space between them felt less like a wall and more like a threshold. On the fifth day, Calder returned with news from the fort. That night, Redfern called for a council near the central fire. Elders came, a few younger warriors. Nora sat off to the side, watching as Calder addressed them in Lakota. She caught only fragments, but she didn't need to speak the language to feel the tension. Faces tightened. Voices rose. One man, broad-shouldered, barely 30, glared at her like she was a snake coiled underfoot. Later, Redfern explained, "The soldiers at Fort Laramie know about you. A boy survived the fire. He says you took his family's money and ran." Nora froze. "That's a lie. I tried to save them." "I believe you," Redfern said, "but truth is slower than gossip." Calder stepped forward. "Lieutenant at the fort gave us 1 week. Then he expects Nora to be brought in. Or he'll come himself." "So I'm a burden now," Nora muttered, "even to the people who saved me." "You're not a burden," Calder said, "but you are a decision." Nora looked up at him. "Then give me one. A choice." Redfern and Calder exchanged a glance. "There's a mission north of here," Calder said. 3 days' ride. Sister Mary runs it. She takes in anyone who's been cast out. White, native, mixed. She doesn't care about gossip. She'll give you a place. "And the soldiers?" "They won't follow you there. Not for a woman they already thought was dead." Nora didn't answer right away. The fire crackled between them. Redfern leaned in. "They left you to burn once, Nora. Don't let them finish the job." By the time Calder saddled the horses, dawn had barely touched the hills. Pale light spilled across the grasslands, cool and soft. One of those rare western mornings when even the wind felt hesitant to stir. Nora stood beside Redfern's lodge, wrapped in a worn shawl that once belonged to Lark's mother. Her ankle still throbbed, but she could walk now. Not gracefully, not fast, but steady. Calder had already packed dried meat, water, and a small satchel of herbs. No fanfare, no goodbyes. Redfern handed her a leather pouch, rough-stitched but strong. Inside, the older woman said, cedar, sage, and blackroot. For the pain, and a braid of sweetgrass. For the memory of this place. Nora took it gently. Thank you for everything. Redfern's dark eyes settled on her with something close to warmth. The world burns people, Nora. You can't stop that. But you can choose what rises from the ash. They rode in silence for hours. Fox Hollow faded behind them. The prairie widened again, open and unknowable. Calder rode ahead, occasionally glancing back to check on her pace. Nora kept her head down, letting the rhythm of the horse numb her thoughts. She hadn't asked what kind of mission this was, or who else might be there. Part of her didn't care. It was enough to be moving forward, to not be burning, to not be forgotten. Around midday, they stopped at a stream. Calder handed her a strip of dried venison and refilled their canteens. Nora sat on a rock, watching the water trace lazy circles around stones. You always this quiet? He asked, not unkindly. Nora smirked. You're one to talk. A flicker of a smile crossed his face. She took a sip from her canteen, then looked up. Do you believe people can start over? Calder didn't answer right away. He crouched beside the stream, letting water run over his hands. Sometimes, he said, but the past always rides behind you. Doesn't mean it wins, but it doesn't vanish either. Nora nodded. Then I guess we both ride with ghosts. They made camp that night beneath a cluster of cottonwoods. Calder started a small fire and showed her how to heat the stone kettle with ash around the edges to trap warmth. She moved with more confidence now, her body remembering tasks long unused. After they ate, he handed her a folded piece of cloth. Inside, a simple wooden comb. Nora blinked. What's this for? You haven't touched your hair in days. She hesitated. Then slowly she drew her braid loose. Dust and tangles fought her fingers. She winced as the comb caught in a knot. Calder didn't stare. He poked the fire, quiet as ever. Eventually, Nora said, I used to work in a dressmaker's shop. Back east. My mother was a seamstress, kept a tidy window. Always said, hands tell your story before your mouth ever does. Calder looked up. And what do yours say? That I've been holding on too long, she said softly. He didn't respond, but something shifted in the air between them. The second day, the sky turned sharp with wind. Dust bit at their faces. Nora pulled her scarf higher, her eyes scanning the landscape. Calder, she called. Riders, east. He turned, squinting toward the ridge. 3 figures on horseback. Fast. He cursed under his breath. Too far from the hollow. If they're from the fort, we won't outrun them. What do? We make it to the old mill near Broken Pine. Abandoned saw shack, half standing. We'll lose them in the gorge if we reach it first. Nora didn't ask questions. She just kicked her horse into motion. The wind howled. Hooves thundered behind them. Nora's heart pounded so loud she barely heard Calder shout, Left! Now! They veered off the trail and into the gorge, ducking beneath low branches. Brush tore at her sleeves. Her ankle burned, but she held fast. The mill came into view, a sagging shell of lumber and moss. They pushed their horses inside and crouched behind an old grinding wheel just as the riders crested the ridge above. Nora held her breath. So did Calder. The riders paused, waited, then turned east again. Silence returned. Inside the mill, Nora collapsed against the wall, breathless. Calder crouched beside her, eyes still sharp, listening for any sound. Soldiers? She asked. He shook his head. Worse. Scouts working for a man named Harrow. He buys information, people, trouble. Someone at the fort must have told him there was a woman who lived. Why would he care about me? Because rumors spread, and Harrow collects leverage like other men collect gold. Nora leaned her head back. So I'm not just a burden, I'm bait. Calder didn't argue, which told her everything. That night, neither of them slept much. They took turns keeping watch. When Nora's shift came, she sat by the dying fire and watched Calder sleep against the far wall, one hand still resting near his rifle. She didn't feel safe, not fully, but she felt seen. She pulled the sweetgrass braid from her pouch, held it between her fingers, and whispered, Not everyone who survives is meant to vanish. By the time they reached Sister Mary's mission the next day, Nora's leg was stiff but usable. The mission wasn't much. A clapboard church, a garden half-planted, 2 cabins in various states of decay. But there were people, a few children playing near a trough, A tall woman in a gray habit tending a goat with one blind eye. Sister Mary turned as they approached. Her hair was silver, her gaze piercing. She took one look at Nora, then at Calder. "She's been through the fire," the nun said, not unkindly. "Yes," Calder replied. "Twice." The sister nodded. "Then she can help me build something that won't burn so easy next time." The first few days at the mission passed like waking up from a long fever. Familiar motions felt foreign, and silence carried weight. Nora swept floors, peeled potatoes, helped fix a collapsed fence post with nothing but a bent nail and determination. Sister Mary worked beside her without fuss or chatter. There was always something to fix, something barely holding together. The mission was a patchwork of stories like hers, people with nowhere else to go. A half-blind carpenter from Wyoming, two sisters orphaned by winter, an old preacher who'd forgotten every verse but one. They spoke little of the past, only of today. And sometimes that was enough. Calder stayed for 2 nights, helping mend the roof and reinforcing the water barrel. Then on the third morning, he mounted his horse at dawn. "You sure you'll be safe?" he asked, adjusting the cinch on his saddle. Sister Mary nodded. "As safe as any place can be." Nora walked him to the edge of the garden, arms crossed. "Will I see you again?" she asked. "You'll hear me before you see me," Calder said, almost smiling. "I ride quiet, but I don't vanish." He handed her a small item wrapped in linen. Inside, a carved stone bead on a leather cord. "For your wrist," he said, "so you remember where you walked out of." Nora's throat tightened. "I won't forget." Then he was gone, dust trailing behind like the ghost of a fire. The next week settled into rhythm. Chores, laughter from the children, chickens that refused to stay in their pen. But by the 7th morning, something felt off. It began with tracks near the back fence. Hoof prints. Not from Sister Mary's mule, and too deep for a trader's wagon. Mary spotted them while gathering herbs and brought Nora to see. 4 horses, all shod. "Heavy riders," she said, crouching low. They circled back toward the ridge. Nora scanned the horizon. "Do the soldiers ever patrol here?" Number. And if they did, they wouldn't be this quiet. That afternoon, a fence was cut. A chicken went missing. Nothing huge, but enough. That night, Sister Mary knocked on Nora's door. "Time to speak plain," she said. "You've got a shadow, and I believe it's found us." Nora helped load food into the root cellar the next morning, hands moving on instinct while her mind spun in circles. Why follow her here? What did they want? She opened the leather pouch Redfern had given her. The sweetgrass had dried into a tight spiral. The cedar was brittle, sharp to the touch. That's when she heard it, something snapping in the brush. She froze. A figure stood at the edge of the trees, watching, not moving. A tall man in a tan coat, black hat, broad shoulders. Then he tipped the brim. Nora stepped back, heart hammering. He didn't approach, just turned and vanished into the trees. She told Sister Mary everything. The nun listened, arms folded, jaw tight. "That's Harrow's man. I've seen him before. 2 years back, sniffing around when the Barkley girl escaped her keeper. You think he's here for me? Not just you. He collects what others discard. If you've got land, gold, leverage, or just a name, he'll find a way to make it his." Nora exhaled sharply. "Then what do? We prepare, and we don't wait." That evening, Sister Mary brought out a long chest from beneath the altar. Inside, a rifle, 2 pistols, a length of oiled rope, and a saddlebag packed for leaving. "I was a soldier's daughter once," she said, "and God's patience does not extend to men who hunt women for sport." Nora touched the rifle with uncertain hands. "You ever shoot one?" Mary asked. "No," Nora admitted, "but I know how to hold one. My father taught me enough." "Then I'll teach you the rest." They practiced behind the chapel at dawn. Nora's hands shook on the first few rounds, but by midday she hit the fence post clean. Mary showed her how to count breaths, how to brace her elbow against her ribs, how to keep her finger from twitching too soon. By the 3rd morning, Nora hit the mark twice in a row. "You've got something in you," Mary said. "Not rage, not vengeance, just clarity." "Feels strange," Nora murmured, wiping sweat from her brow. "Stranger than dying for someone else's story?" No, Nora said. Feels better than that. But peace didn't last. That night, the goats bleated wildly. Nora bolted upright and grabbed the rifle. She met Mary at the door, eyes wide. A fire burned behind the north shed. Not large, but enough to draw them out. They ran toward it, and that's when Nora realized it was a diversion. Back at the lodge, the front door creaked open. She whirled around and raised the rifle. There, standing in the mission's chapel doorway, was the same man in the tan coat. Behind him, two others, one with a rifle, one with a length of chain. "We're just here for the girl," the lead man said. "No need to cause a fuss." Mary stepped forward. "You've no claim here." The man tilted his head. "Don't need claim, just a price." He looked at Nora. "You've got folks with questions, ones that don't like you walking around after you were supposed to burn." Nora raised the rifle, hands steady. "I've got no answers for them," she said. "Only for you." She fired. The bullet grazed his coat and slammed into the doorframe. The men ducked. Mary grabbed her pistol. The second man fired blindly. Missed. Nora fired again, catching him in the thigh. Chaos erupted. Chickens screamed. Someone shouted. Then silence. The three men stumbled into the night, one limping, one bleeding, none with what they came for. By dawn, they were gone. Mary stood on the porch, holding a lantern. "You made your choice," she said. "I did. And they'll be back. I know." "Then next time," Mary said, gripping her rifle, "we greet them with the fire they wanted so badly." Nora stared out across the plain, wind in her hair. She was tired of being chased, tired of running. Let them come. This time she wouldn't be the one who burned. The morning after the gunfire, the mission was quiet, but not calm. Sister Mary walked the perimeter with her rifle slung over one shoulder and prayer beads in her pocket. She barked orders like a battlefield sergeant. Reinforce the door. Bring water to the cellar. Move the children to the root house. Every step had purpose. Every motion had weight. Nora followed her, helping where she could, ankles still stiff but her hands steady. "We should send word," she said finally, "to Fox Hollow, to Calder." Mary looked at her, sharp as ever. "You think he'll come?" "I think he already knew they'd follow," Nora replied. "He just didn't know how far." That night Lark arrived. Alone. Dusty, breathless, and riding hard, she collapsed off her pony at the front gate, clutching a torn scrap of paper, a signal cloth Redfern had taught Nora to knot in a specific pattern. Mary helped the girl inside while Nora fetched water. Lark pointed behind her, breath ragged. "Redfern. Not far. Others coming." Within 2 hours they appeared. Calder, Redfern, and two riders from Fox Hollow. All wore dust and tension like armor. They brought packs of herbs, wrapped venison, and what looked like a crate of ammunition. When Calder saw Nora, he didn't speak, just gave a nod that said more than words ever could. "You lit a fire, Sky," Redfern said, unslinging her bow. "Might as well finish what they started." They met that night in the chapel. Sister Mary lit a single lantern. The others sat on benches, quiet, alert. Nora stood beside a crude drawing she'd scratched into a slab of wood, the layout of the mission. 4 main paths, 3 blind spots, 2 defensible positions. "They won't come during daylight," she said. "Not again. They know we're watching, and they know now I'll shoot." "They're used to women running," Mary said, "not standing their ground." Calder leaned forward. "We need to turn the ground itself against them. Set traps. Move what we can into the gully behind the chapel. If they get through the front, we bottleneck them." Redfern nodded. "I'll take the north side. Lark stays with the children." Mary looked to Nora. "And you?" Nora didn't hesitate. "I want the front door." Later that night, when most had gone to sleep, Mary and Nora remained by the fire. Mary poured them each a small tin of warm cider, hands steady even after all that had passed. "You never asked why I helped you," she said. Nora looked up. "I assumed you were just good." "I'm not," Mary replied. "I'm tired." She stared into the flames. "Years ago, I let a girl like you leave this place. She had red hair and soft hands and a way of looking at things like she still believed in the world. A man came through asking questions, said he was her uncle. I believed him, handed her over myself. Mary sipped her cider. 3 days later, we found her body by the creek, rope still on her wrists. Nora's breath caught. I built this mission for orphans, wanderers, anyone too bruised to keep going, Mary said. But it took losing one to make me understand what protection really means. She looked at Nora directly now. I failed her. I won't fail you. By the next morning, the mission had transformed. Furniture turned to barricades. Flour sacks formed shooting rests. Calder taught the children how to recognize danger by sound and hide in silence. Redfern and Lark painted markings on the ground, signals only their people would recognize. And still, Nora wondered, why me? Why chase one woman this far? The answer came just before dusk, a letter shoved under the fence line, folded neatly, signed with a snake drawn in ink. Nora opened it. You were never meant to walk out of the flames. Your name is on land papers tied to 3 claims outside Laramie. Your merchant father signed them over to a man who's now dead. That makes you heir by blood. We've waited. We've watched. You're not a ghost. You're a key. Come now, and we let the others live. Mary read it beside her. That's what they're after. Land, Nora whispered, that I didn't even know was mine. Then you've got more power than you think, Mary said, and they're afraid of that. Nora stared at the letter long into the night. For years she'd tried to disappear, hide her name, bury the pieces of herself too sharp to carry. Now that same name had become a weapon, a reason to fight. She traced the carving on the bead Calder had given her. Then she walked outside. The prairie wind pressed against her like a memory. They think they can erase me, she said to the dark. But the stars were listening now. So was the land. And this time, she had allies. The air that morning was too still. Even the birds held their breath. Somewhere beyond the ridge, horses stirred. Dust lifted in slow curls along the horizon. Calder stood near the chapel roof, scanning the tree line through his spyglass. Redfern crouched near the east fence. Arrow knocked. Nora waited just inside the chapel door, hands wrapped around the rifle Sister Mary had cleaned herself the night before. She wasn't trembling anymore. This time she was ready. The first shot didn't come from them. It rang out from the ridge, sharp, deliberate, a signal. Then came the riders, 5 of them. The man in the tan coat led, his black hat low over his brow, a carbine strapped across his chest. Behind him, 2 gun hands, one with a bandaged leg. Nora recognized him. The third man was older, mean in the eyes, slow in the draw, but likely deadly all the same. The 5th rider didn't carry a weapon. He carried a rolled deed. They're not here to shoot first, Calder muttered from the roof. They're here to bargain. Mary stepped out, hands up but firm. You'll speak from the fence, no closer. The man in the coat reined in. We're not looking for blood, just the girl, and what belongs to her. What belongs to her, Mary said coolly, is hers, and she stays. She's a risk, the man replied. That land was promised to other men, powerful men, and men like that don't like broken promises. Nora stepped forward then, rifle at her side, voice even. Then they should have left me in the fire. The man tipped his head. Last chance, Miss Skye. You hand yourself over, we leave this place standing. Nora didn't look at Mary, or Calder, or Redfern. She looked at Lark, hiding behind the water barrel, at the children behind the chapel windows, at the chapel itself, half broken, barely upright, but still standing. No, she said, you already took everything I didn't know I had. I'm not giving you what I found since. The man clicked his tongue. Shame. He raised a hand. Shots cracked through the stillness. But this time, they were ready. Redfern's arrow hit the man with the bandaged leg before his rifle cleared the holster. Calder fired from the roof, dropping the second. Sister Mary pulled Nora inside and threw the door closed, just as a shot blew splinters through the doorway. Nora ducked and crawled to the side window, taking position. Through the haze, she saw one rider circling wide. She aimed, waited, breathed, fired. The man reeled back, his horse bucking wildly. He fell, hit the dirt, didn't rise. 2 down. Smoke drifted now, not from fire but from gunpowder and churned dust. Mary handed out more rounds while Nora reloaded. Back wall, Calder shouted. Nora moved without hesitation. She rounded the chapel, heart thudding, and found the man in the tan coat breaching the fence on foot. He carried no rifle now, just a pistol and a coil of rope. He spotted her. "You could have made this easy," he growled. "You had your fire," she said. "Now you get mine." He raised his pistol. Nora fired first. The shot punched him back. His pistol clattered to the dirt. She approached slowly, barrel steady. "Who sent you?" she demanded. He coughed, blood trailing down his lip. "Land, claim, Eastern Bank, tied to her father's old debts. Worth gold now." "Who's behind it?" He laughed weakly. "You think it's just me?" "Girl, you've got no idea how far this goes." She stepped closer. "Then tell me." His eyes closed. Too late. And then he was still. By noon it was over. Two of the men lay dead. One escaped into the grass, bleeding. One never made it past the outer fence. The fifth, the oldest one, had vanished. But Sister Mary found the deed he dropped in the grass. They brought it into the chapel. Redfern spread it across the altar. "It's true," she said, scanning the signatures. "Your father's land, transferred without full release. That makes it contested." "But it's mine," Nora said. "Yes," Calder confirmed. "And now they know you won't let it go quietly." Later that evening, as the sun slipped low behind the hills, they buried the men in shallow graves outside the east fence. Sister Mary offered no sermon, only a warning. "Let the earth take what it must, but never let it silence you." Lark tied a red thread to the chapel gate post, a sign of defense, of survival. And Nora? She stood on the porch, rifle at her side, wind tugging at her sleeves. "I thought running would keep people safe," she said to Calder. "And now? Now I think I was born to fight with fire, not flee from it." He looked at her then, truly looked. "What will you do with the land?" Nora smiled faintly. "Build something. Something that doesn't burn so easy next time. Some fires take everything. Homes, names, even the version of yourself you thought you'd finally become. But some fires don't destroy. They reveal. The truth, the fight, the strength you didn't know was still there." Nora Skye walked out of the prairie with no family name left, no fortune, no friends. And yet, she built something stronger than all of them. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to run, it's to stay, to stand, to say, "You won't take one more piece of me." If this story burned through you the way it did through us, if you felt the weight of silence in Sister Mary's chapel or the hope in Nora's final stand, we'd love to hear from you. Tell us in the comments, what moment hit the hardest? Which character stayed with you long after the story ended? And most of all, where in the world are you watching from? Your hometown, your county, your own quiet porch at sundown? Every voice matters here. This is Wild West Stories, where courage takes many shapes, and sometimes the strongest flame is the one that refuses to die. They tied her to the post at high noon. The sun didn't blink, neither did the crowd. Blood streaked her cheek. Rope dug deep into her ribs. Dirt clung to her skin like it belonged there. No one asked why she hadn't spoken. No one wondered if her silence meant more than guilt. The sheriff read the charges with sharp breath. Treason, collusion with outsiders, attempted poisoning of a town official, her own husband. The man stood behind the crowd, immaculate, respected, not a hair out of place. His hands folded, his expression calm. He didn't flinch when they read her name, didn't look away when the children in the crowd turned their heads. He had planned it well. She couldn't speak, not after what they did to her. But someone else heard the silence. At the edge of the square, leaning against the last wooden post, a man stood still. Half Lakota, half forgotten. He listened. He watched. And when they said the word execution, his eyes narrowed, because the only thing louder than her silence was how much it didn't make sense. They called her Evelyn Wren, a name clean enough for invitations, polite enough for fundraisers, pretty enough to be pinned beside a man like Matthew Kane. And that's all most folks ever saw. They didn't see the way she flinched when doors slammed, didn't hear how quiet her voice became after the wedding, didn't notice she only wore long sleeves after the honeymoon ended. To them, she was lucky, married into one of the wealthiest families in the territory, owner of Kane Freight and Rail, wife of the man who rebuilt the schoolhouse, financed the church bell, donated food during the last drought. Lucky, they said. She smiled and nodded, every time, because lies are easier to swallow when everyone keeps feeding them to you. Matthew Kane had teeth behind his smile. Not the kind you see, the kind you feel, the kind that waits until no one's watching. He knew how to wear respect like a well-fitted coat, polished, stiff, carefully tailored to never wrinkle, never stain. He was a man of numbers, of land deeds and oil maps and signed checks with names scratched in quick loops. The kind of man who never raised his voice because his money did it for him. And Evelyn? She was the decoration on his arm, the silken ribbon to his empire. He picked her because she was plain enough not to distract, quiet enough not to interrupt, and beautiful enough to be framed on the mantle, like everything else he owned. He didn't ask if she wanted to marry him. He asked her father. The deal was sealed with a handshake, a dowry tucked in the form of railway stock, and a house waiting at the edge of Red Valley. They called it a union. She called it paper. At first, Evelyn tried to make it a life. She arranged flowers, read by the window, tried to find corners in the big house that felt like her. But nothing echoed. Not laughter, not footsteps, only silence, hung heavy like drapes soaked in dust and secrets. She was allowed to walk the garden, shop in town, smile politely to those who nodded in admiration, but if her gaze lingered too long on the papers in Matthew's study, his hand would rest firmly, warningly, on the back of her neck. Still, she wondered, quietly, wondered why certain names came up so often in hushed voices, why trains left at night with no manifest, why two boys she'd seen loading wagons last spring had disappeared, and no one mentioned them again. It wasn't suspicion that drew her in. It was instinct, like hearing thunder before the clouds roll in. She found the ledgers one afternoon, tucked behind a crate of flour in the pantry cellar. She hadn't been looking for them. She'd been chasing a mouse. Funny how truth hides beside things you never mean to see. The books were dusty, thick, leather-bound with no titles. Just page after page of names, dates, codes, payouts for silence, containment, and removal. At first, she didn't understand. Then she saw the initials, then the sheriff's name, then the symbol Matthew used to sign land deals, drawn beside a number of graves marked property disputes. Her stomach turned, not because she was afraid of what he'd done, but because of what he might do when he found out she knew. That night, she left the lamp burning. Matthew came in just past midnight. Boots clean, hands not. He looked at her without sitting, without unbuttoning his coat. "You saw something," he said. She didn't answer. He stepped closer, slowly, calmly. "You should have let the rats be." Then, like someone brushing dust from his sleeve, he slapped her. Not hard, just enough to remind her what he was. Her head snapped sideways. The taste of copper bloomed behind her teeth. Still, she didn't cry, didn't run, just wiped her lip, met his eyes, and said nothing. Because she knew even then, words could be stolen, but knowing couldn't. 2 days later, the sheriff arrived, friendly as always, hat in hand, smile too white. He complimented her garden, asked about her health, commented on the weather, then, as if remembering suddenly, said, "There have been whispers about Evelyn, about her slipping notes to strangers, passing information to outsiders, standing too long near the freight yard where the old grave markers no longer stood." Matthew stood beside him the whole time, silent, the way men do when they don't need to lie, because others will do it for them. "Best to keep her out of town for a while," the sheriff said, "for her own good." That night, Evelyn was escorted from her own home. She didn't scream, she didn't fight, because they hadn't taken her body yet, only her name. She was held in the basement of the sheriff's outpost. 3 days, no food, little water. One kick when she asked for it. By the second night, her voice had turned hoarse. By the third, it cracked when she whispered. By morning, it was gone. She awoke to hands dragging her upright, dirt in her mouth, ropes around her wrists. Someone muttered, "Don't tighten it too much. She still needs to stand." And she was taken, through the back alleys, so no one would see the bruises until it was time to. The square was full. It always was for justice. People love a good ending when they don't have to write the beginning. The sun glared down like it too, wanted to watch. The sheriff stood tall, the same man who'd offered her tea last harvest, now reading charges of treason, conspiracy, and attempted murder of her own husband. Matthew stood behind him, arms crossed, lips a thin line. The town whispered. She was always too quiet. I heard she was half savage. She stared too long. That's not a good sign in a woman. No one asked why she didn't deny it. No one asked why her throat was purple and swollen. No one asked why Matthew smiled. But someone saw. Not just the bruises, not just the lie, but her. At the edge of the crowd, leaning against a broken hitching post, a man stood still. Dark eyes, weather-worn jacket, a bow across his back, rare for this side of the territory, half Lakota, half white, all silent. His name was Callan Swiftwater, and while the crowd shouted, he watched. Not her pain, not the performance, but the space between. That's where truth hides, between noise and silence, and he could see it plain as day. She wasn't guilty. She just couldn't speak, and someone wanted her gone badly enough to make sure she never would. Callan Swiftwater didn't belong, not to the Lakota, not to the white folk, not even to the earth he slept on. He walked like a man made of two halves that never shook hands, one carved in prairie wind and war paint, the other shaped by schoolhouse silence and cold church pews. His mother called him her whisper. His father never called him anything at all. He lived in a cabin built from broken things, driftwood, scavenged beams, a roof made from what the railroad left behind. The mountains didn't mind. The trees didn't ask questions. They only swayed when he passed, as if nodding to someone they knew but couldn't place. The town called him the Quiet One. He'd been there 5 years, hauled wood, repaired wagons, hunted only what he needed and sold the rest. Children pointed, men nodded, mostly when sober. Women didn't speak to him at all, and that suited Callan just fine. Because when people spoke, they lied. When they stayed quiet, that's when truth crept in. He had come into Red Valley after the war. Not the big one, just one of many smaller ones the papers didn't bother naming. A skirmish over river rights. He'd fought beside a Lakota scout company for 13 nights. Bled on dirt that didn't know whose name to cry. He never talked about it. Didn't need to. The scar along his side spoke well enough. That morning, he'd come into town for flour. He didn't like being there when crowds gathered, but he'd forgotten the date. Didn't know the sheriff had posted charges. Didn't hear the rumors. Didn't even know the name Evelyn Wren until he saw her, tied to the post, blood down one cheek, rope across her chest, eyes open, but not crying, not begging, not blinking. She looked like someone who'd already been buried and decided to come back just to see how the world moved without her. He stopped walking. Just stopped. A child bumped into his hip. The mother yanked her boy away. Didn't say sorry, didn't look him in the eye. The sheriff was reading the charges again, louder this time, for effect. Treason, poison, sedition, attempted murder of her husband, a respected businessman. The word husband made Callan shift. He scanned the crowd, looked past the sheriff, past the noose. There, standing tall in his Sunday coat, arms crossed, no shadow on his face. Matthew Kane. Callan had hauled firewood to his house once, a year ago. Kane hadn't said thank you, only wiped the porch clean after Callan's boots left dirt behind. A clean man, a careful man, the kind who stared too long without blinking, the kind who never asked questions because he always knew the answers. Callan looked back at the woman. She didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't speak. That was what struck him first. Not the bruises, not the crowd, but her silence. It wasn't helpless, it was loud, and it felt wrong. Callan stepped back into shadow, leaned against the rail of the empty stable. He crossed his arms, lowered his hat, watched. All afternoon the town murmured. They came and went, threw curses, some threw stones. Children mimicked the sheriff's tone. Women whispered about madness and betrayal. Old men called her a warning to others. Callan listened, not to the words, but to the tone. fear, mistrust, and something worse, relief. They wanted her to be guilty, needed her to be, because if she wasn't, then they had all become something uglier than they knew. That night, Callan sat in the field just outside town. Didn't ride home, didn't sleep. The wind moved through the grass like breath. He stared at the stars, arms behind his head, and thought about her silence. The way her hands didn't shake, the way her mouth opened, just barely, but no sound came. The way her eyes didn't plead. They dared. He knew what that looked like. He'd seen it in men with broken jaws, in children too afraid to name what they'd seen. He'd seen it in the mirror, back when mirrors were still something he looked into. The next morning he came back. Didn't know why, just walked. Same hat, same bow on his back, same silence. She was still there, still tied. The sheriff stood nearby, chatting with Kane. The trial would be tomorrow, they said. Just a formality. She'd be hanged by dusk. Can't have traitors in this town. She didn't even defend herself. Not once. Callan turned, walked into the store, bought nails and nothing else. But his eyes, they never left her. By sunset, the town square emptied. Kane had returned to his estate. The sheriff had posted new flyers, and Callan stood alone beside the post where she hung. Not dead, just waiting. She looked at him, not directly, just slightly. Enough to know she saw him, enough to let him know. She still wasn't broken. He reached into his satchel, pulled out a water skin, walked forward. The deputy barked, "No closer!" Callan didn't stop, didn't speak, just handed the water skin over, held it until Evelyn's fingers brushed his. Her hand shook slightly, just enough to feel like thunder under his skin. He stepped back. Didn't look at the deputy, didn't look at anyone, just walked away, because he'd heard enough. Tomorrow, they'd call it justice. But tonight? Tonight he knew something they didn't. Tomorrow, he wouldn't stay quiet. The morning came cold. Not the kind that bites, the kind that settles, like a hush before a sermon. Or the stillness just before the rope pulls tight. The town square filled slowly, boots scraping, whispers growing. It was a kind of celebration in its own way. The crowd wore their best. Mothers held children tighter. Men stood straighter. Because justice, when done publicly, lets people pretend they never looked away in the first place. They called it a trial, but there was no judge, no lawyer, no witness. Just the sheriff with his polished boots and the preacher with his prayers folded neat and thin. Evelyn Wren stood between them, still bound, still silent. Her voice hadn't returned. Not that it would have mattered. She could have screamed bloody murder and the town still would have chosen Kane. Because he was clean, rich, articulate, and she was inconvenient. Callan arrived late on purpose. He didn't want to stand beside people who whispered poison. Didn't want to hear the mothers explain to their sons why some women were dangerous. He found his place in shadow, same as always. But his eyes, today, they didn't drift. They locked on Evelyn. She hadn't changed. Same bruises, same dirt-stained hem, same expression, except her hands. They moved, only slightly, only once. But he saw it, a twitch, a curl of her left finger against the rope, like someone marking the count of seconds, like someone waiting for a storm. The sheriff cleared his throat. By consensus of the town and the authority invested in this post, Evelyn Kane, formerly Wren, you are hereby sentenced to death by hanging at sunset. A murmur passed like wind through wheat. No one clapped, but some smiled. Kane stood at the back, arms folded, unmoved. Callan watched him, watched how still he stood, how little he blinked, how quickly he turned when the sentence ended, as if already walking back to dinner. Callan's jaw tightened. Something inside him shifted, not like a thought, more like a door opening in the chest. Something that had been quiet for too long, something that no longer agreed to stay silent. The preacher stepped forward, reciting verses about forgiveness and the Lord's plan. Callan barely heard it. His eyes traced the rope, the pulleys, the platform. He noticed the worn beam above, the splinters, the crack that ran just under the bolt. He could hear her breath now, shallow, rhythmic, controlled. She wasn't afraid, not of death, not of the crowd. What scared her, Callan understood now, was being forgotten, of her story ending with someone else's lie. And maybe that's what did it, not her silence, not her beauty, not even the injustice, but the way she stood, like a flag that refused to fall in wind, like a name no one could pronounce but everyone knew. That was the moment Callan Swiftwater moved. He stepped through the crowd, didn't run, didn't yell, just walked, straight toward the platform, straight toward her. A few men shifted. One reached for his belt. Too slow. Callan's hand moved like water. One swing. The man dropped. Another reached. A boot to the ribs. Then silence. Total. Because no one expected him to move. No one expected anyone to move. He stepped onto the platform, stood beside her, met her eyes for the first time. She blinked. He pulled a blade, quick, clean. The ropes fell. She collapsed. He caught her, carried her like something breakable, but not broken. The sheriff shouted, Kane screamed, guns raised. But Callan didn't stop. He jumped off the edge of the gallows, rolled, covered her body with his own, stood, drew the bow from his back, arrow notched, drawn, aimed not to kill, but to warn. He fired high. The bell shattered, a loud, ringing cry across the square. Then silence. Then hooves. His horse, tied at the edge of town, came like it had waited all morning for this moment. He lifted Evelyn, swung her across, mounted, and rode. Bullets chased him through the dust, but none found him. He rode hard, through gullies and dry creek beds, through cottonwoods that whispered Lakota blessings in the wind. He didn't speak. She didn't ask. But her hands clung to him now, not in fear, but in defiance, like she'd finally found something solid after drifting too long. By nightfall, they reached his cabin, a place no one visited, a place forgotten even by maps. He carried her inside, laid her gently on a cot, lit a fire. Still, not a word. Not yet. He offered her water, bread, a blanket. She took all three. Then, finally, her voice cracked out. One word. Why? He looked up. Didn't smile, didn't blink. Just answered, because I heard what they didn't. It took 3 days for her to say another word. Even then, it wasn't a full sentence. Just fragments. A cracked whisper, like wind passing through broken shutters. Ledger. That was the first. Callan didn't ask what she meant. He didn't need to. He'd seen enough men choke on the truth to know what the word cost her. The cabin sat quiet in the mountains, surrounded by pines and granite that hadn't moved in 1,000 years. Callan had hunted here, healed here, forgotten parts of himself here. Now she was here too, sleeping on his cot, wrapped in his blanket, drinking from the same tin cup he used every winter. But she was never in the way. She didn't ask questions. She didn't cry. She didn't shrink from the bruises or the silence between them. Instead, she waited, watched, rebuilt herself hour by hour, breath by breath. And Callan watched too, not to measure her pain, but to memorize her strength. One morning, he caught her standing barefoot in the doorway, steam from the kettle curling around her like smoke. She didn't turn, but she spoke. I wasn't his wife. Callan blinked, waited. She swallowed. Not really. He bought the paper, bought the preacher, told my father it would protect me after he passed, said he'd give me time. Her voice cracked. He didn't. She gripped the doorframe, not to hold herself up, but to stop from reaching for something sharp. Callan stayed still, then quietly said, I figured. She turned then, really turned, eyes wide, wet, furious and fragile all at once. You figured, he nodded once. Saw your face when they said his name. She sat on the edge of the step, didn't speak again for a while. Neither did he. But the silence this time wasn't hollow. It was a bridge. Later that day, she handed him something wrapped in cloth, a small bundle she'd hidden in the folds of her skirt. Inside, a torn corner of ledger paper, a wax seal half melted. One name scrawled across the top. Not Kane's, someone else's. One Callan had heard in war. A supplier, a slaver, a name that bled. Evelyn whispered, "It's not the only copy." He raised an eyebrow. "It's hidden." "Where?" She looked down. "In Kane's study, under the floor, right corner, beneath the Navajo rug." Her hands trembled, not from fear, from knowing she'd have to go back. That night, Callan sharpened his knife, checked his bow, cleaned the rifle he hadn't touched since the last Lakota raid 5 years ago. She sat nearby, feeding logs into the fire. "You planning to go in alone?" she asked. "No." "You planning to let me come?" He met her eyes. "You'd go back." Her stare didn't waver. "You think I'd let him erase me after everything?" He gave a slow nod. "Then we go." The next morning they rode before dawn. No trail, no light, only memory and instinct. Evelyn led the way. Each step toward Red Valley pressed the bruises deeper into her skin, but she rode straight, spine like steel. By nightfall, the town's outer ridge came into view. They didn't go straight in. They watched from the canyon ridge. Lanterns moved through windows. Kane's house sat high, smug on the hill. Evelyn whispered, "He sleeps with a pistol under the pillow." Callan replied, "He won't wake up fast enough." They waited until the moon sank low, then moved. Two shadows where once there had been noise. They crossed the back pasture, through the garden, past the cellar door. Evelyn held her breath when the porch creaked, but Callan's hand found hers. Just once, just long enough. Inside, the floorboards moaned. The rug was still there. She dropped to her knees, palmed the corner, lifted the wood. There, beneath the dust and rot, the ledger, pages thick with ink and names that shouldn't have survived the war. She didn't smile, but something in her chest lifted. Then, footsteps, Kane's voice distant. "Whiskey, where's the damn—" They froze. Callan moved first, pressed her to the wall, hand over her mouth, breath locked. Kane passed the hallway, didn't look, didn't see, didn't know he was already a ghost in the story he'd tried to bury. They left before the rooster crowed, ledger in hand, dust in their throats. No one saw them go. No one heard the past unbury itself behind them. But something in the town shifted, a whisper, a doubt, a crack in the paint. Back at the cabin, Evelyn placed the ledger on the table like it was a Bible. She ran her fingers over each name, each number, each wound. Callan stood behind her, arms crossed, watching. "You gonna take it to the sheriff?" he asked. She shook her head. "I'm going to take it to the people." He didn't speak, just watched her straighten her back, light the lantern, and begin to write a list. The ledger sat heavy on the table, not just in weight, in what it meant. Each page was a grave, each number a crime wrapped in bookkeeping. Evelyn turned the pages like a priest reading last rites. Not fast, not with anger, but with reverence. Because names mattered now. They spent 2 days copying the pages, one, by hand, with Callan sharpening pencils in between, and Evelyn breathing through the tremors in her knuckles. Sometimes she'd pause, stare at a particular name, and whisper, "He had a daughter," or "That man went missing last spring." The ledger wasn't just proof, it was testimony, from the silenced, and Evelyn was ready to speak for them. On the third morning, she stood by the door, cloak tied tight, wind lifting her hair. Callan saddled the horses without speaking. He didn't need to ask. He knew where they were going. Red Valley didn't deserve mercy, but it deserved the truth. They arrived at midday. No crowds this time, just townsfolk moving like they always had, heads down, words shallow, until Evelyn stepped into the square. Her boots echoed against the planks, her face pale, jaw tight, chin raised. She walked to the steps of the town hall, set down the ledger, and opened it wide. No one spoke. Not at first. Then a whisper. "That's Kane's wife." Number Wren. She was Wren before him. "She's supposed to be dead?" Evelyn turned toward the voices, her eyes locked with one. A school teacher, then another. A storekeeper's wife, then another. An old man who'd seen too much war to believe in clean stories. She spoke, slow, dry, voice like gravel and ember. "My name is Evelyn Wren." not Kane. Wren. 3 days ago, you stood and watched me sentenced to death. She paused. Let that truth simmer. You never asked what I knew, never wondered why I didn't speak. But today, you will listen. She held the ledger high. This is what you were never meant to see. Callan stood to her left, unmoving, eyes locked on Kane's estate up the hill. Any second now, the sheriff would come. Kane would come. But they'd come too late, because the town had already heard her voice. Evelyn flipped open the page, read a name, a date, a payout to silence a grieving mother. Gasps followed. She read another and another. Voices stirred. A woman stepped forward. That was my brother. A man, fist clenched. I helped bury that boy. Kane said it was an accident. Evelyn nodded. He lied. Page after page. Debt, bribery, land stolen. Children vanished. Women disappeared. Kane hadn't just broken laws. He'd broken families. And Evelyn? She hadn't just survived him. She'd brought his empire down in ink and ash. The sheriff arrived, breathless, pistol drawn. Step away from the people, miss. Callan didn't move. The townsfolk, strangely, didn't either. The teacher said, let her speak. The storekeeper's wife added, we've heard enough of you. The sheriff faltered. Callan said quiet, try it and you won't walk back. The ledger dropped to the sheriff's feet. Open to the page with his name. 3 payouts, 2 false arrests, 1 line underlined in Evelyn's hand. Cover up, Evelyn Wren. The sheriff stared, then dropped his gun. Kane arrived last. Suit pressed, hat neat. But there was no applause this time, only silence. Evelyn stepped down the stairs, met him eye to eye. You tried to take my voice. Kane's face twitched. But you forgot what I could write. He sneered. You think any of this matters? They won't remember you in a week. A boy's voice rang out. I will. Then a girl. Me too. Then the storekeeper. Say her name. A dozen more joined. Say it. Say it. And in the square where they'd almost hung her, they chanted, Evelyn Wren. Kane reached for his coat pocket. Too slow. Callan moved. Faster than rage. Pinned him. Took the weapon. Held him there, beneath the weight of every lie. The sheriff took the cuffs from his own belt. No one stopped him. By sunset, Kane sat behind iron, the sheriff with him. Evelyn didn't stay for the rest. She walked, quiet, through the town that had once spat on her name. Now they parted for her, like tide for moonlight. Callan followed, not behind, beside. That night back at the cabin, she watched the fire with her knees pulled to her chest. You think they'll forget? She asked. Callan shook his head. They'll remember. She smiled, small. True, then whispered. So will I. The snow came early that year. It coated the mountains in a hush that once matched Evelyn's silence. But not anymore. The cabin had changed. Not much, just enough. A second chair near the fire, 2 tin cups on the table, a row of freshly written pages stacked neatly beside the hearth. Her story. Not just what was done to her, but what she had done back. She read aloud in the evenings, not just to Callan, to herself, to the trees outside, to the wind that once carried whispers of her name like curses. Now it carried something else. Hope. Memory. Truth. Callan fixed the roof before the real storms came. She helped, clumsy with nails, careful with balance. He didn't laugh, just handed her another plank. They didn't talk much while working, but the silence no longer felt like an absence. It was comfort, a language of its own. One night, as the fire cracked low and the coyotes howled beyond the ridge, Evelyn laid the last page of her story on the table. She didn't bind it, didn't need to, because stories weren't meant to be caged. They were meant to travel. And this one, hers, had already begun its journey. In Red Valley, things changed slowly, but they changed. The teacher began teaching Lakota words. The sheriff's badge went to a woman whose brother Kane had tried to disappear. The gallows were torn down, and in their place, a tree, planted by the children, named after her. Not Evelyn Kane, not even Evelyn Wren. Just Evelyn, a name they all now said without shame. Callan built a second room on the cabin. Not for her, for the future. He never asked her to stay, but he also never left. And when she found herself placing her shawl beside his hat, day after day, she realized she already had. They never married, not in the way papers or priests described, but in the quiet ways that mattered more. Shared firewood, shared wounds, shared nights staring at stars without needing to name them. One evening, while she was writing by the window, he placed something beside her. A necklace. Simple. Bone and leather. Her fingers traced the pattern. She looked at him. He just said, "My mother's." She nodded. Didn't need to say thank you. The way she placed it over her collarbone said more than words ever could. Spring came with soft rains. Evelyn's garden, once bare, bloomed. Wildflowers, beans, corn in careful rows. Callan built her a bench. She read to the birds, to the sky, to anyone who'd listen. And many did. People came. First from Red Valley, then farther. They wanted to hear her story from her mouth, to know how she'd survived. She didn't sell it, didn't claim to be a hero. She just told the truth and let it do the rest. One afternoon, a little girl asked her, "Why didn't you scream?" Evelyn paused, thought of the rope, the bruises, the cold of the noose, the heat of Cain's eyes. Then she answered, "Because my silence was never surrender." She looked at Callan, watching from the porch. It was the breath before the storm. And now, the storm had passed, but the wind still remembered. And so did she. Maybe she never raised her voice. Maybe she never shouted back or threw fists or made speeches. But sometimes the loudest justice comes from those who once had no voice at all. Evelyn Wren was never just a victim. She was a woman forged in silence, sharpened by betrayal, and carried by the one man who listened when no one else did. And together they proved that truth doesn't need a crowd to echo. It just needs one person brave enough to speak. Now we ask you, would you have heard her silence? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to share her story.